Schwerer Gustav Railgun. After the First World War, France developed the Maginot Line, an expansive network of defenses on the border between France and Germany, as a measure against potential German aggression. In the lead-up to World War II, German military planners devised several potential strategies to overcome this barrier. One of these plans was as simple as it was straightforward: create a gargantuan artillery piece and blast the defenses into oblivion. Starting in 1934, German industrial giant Krupp had the task of creating an artillery piece that was large and powerful enough to overcome the French fortification. They based their design on existing railway guns, large artillery pieces that moved along dedicated railway tracks rather than moving independently. These types of guns had their origins in the 19th century and were also used extensively during both World Wars. Krupp, who made railway guns for the German army in the First World War, took that concept and expanded on it. Literally. The result was a gun of epic proportions. The gun named Schwerer Gustav, Schwerer meaning heavy, and Gustav after its creator. Gustav Krupp had a length of 147 feet, width of 20 feet, with a barrel length of just under 107 feet. It tipped the scales at 1,490 tons. The shell that this behemoth fired was an impressive 80 centimeter in diameter and came in two variants: a high explosive shell that weighed in at 5.2 ton and an even larger 7-ton armor-piercing round designed to punch through thick reinforced concrete bunkers. It had a range of 29 miles, much further than any potential return fire could reach. As can be imagined, the cost of developing and building such a huge gun was also immense and cost about 10 million Reichsmarks, an astounding sum of money for the era. Though Krupp gave the gun to the German military free of charge in support of the war effort, 2 of the guns were ordered. And though plans were drawn up as early as the mid-1930s, actually producing the weapons was easier said than done. By the time the manufacturing was completed, the battle for France was over, and the Maginot Line, the reason for the gun's creation, had been simply outflanked and rendered useless. There is some controversy about the number of guns that were built, though. Conventional sources place the number at 2 produced, the first being the Schwerer Gustav, and a second named Dora, named after the wife of the lead engineer on the project. However, there is evidence that Schwerer Gustav was the official designation, and that the crew that operated it nicknamed it Dora on their own, leading many to believe that there was a second gun, when in fact only one was built. In either case, the gun or guns could not be transported in one piece, but broken down into 5 separate sections and transported by rail to the firing position using specialized engines and taking up to 25 separate railway cars to do so. Once there, it took a workforce of around 2,000 men, including a crew of 250, to prepare the location for firing. A set of parallel railroad tracks would be laid, a process which took up most of the manpower and time. Once this was in place, the gun carriage would be assembled, and then the gun itself. Because of the weight, the gun barrel would be split in half and transported separately, and then reassembled. The 2 halves connected with a barrel jacket. The barrel would be attached to the breech block and cradle, and had hydraulic dampeners to mitigate some of the immense recoil produced by firing the weapon. The entire process could take over 3 weeks to complete before Gustav was ready to fire. Constructing the Schwerer Gustav was an incredibly complex undertaking. It required thousands of workers to assemble, with countless intricate components and extensive over-engineering. Thankfully, however, running a business doesn't have to be quite so complicated. Thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Odoo. Odoo is a business platform that has all the apps you need to run a business, from sales to accounting to building a website. In fact, their website builder was one of the apps that drew our attention most. It's incredibly easy to make and edit a website from scratch within just a few clicks. Drag and drop some blocks, edit text, colors, add pictures. Everything is fully customizable, and with the ChatGPT integration, you're able to change the tone of your text or just reword it completely as you like. Odoo's first app is completely free forever, such as the website app, and all this comes with free support and unlimited hosting. Click on the link in the description below and gain access to your 1-year free custom domain name that Odoo is giving away. In addition to the crew needed to prepare and fire the Schwerer Gustav, a large amount of manpower would be dedicated to anti-air defenses. Being such a large target, Allied air power would prioritize destroying the gun, and 2 dedicated flak battalions were assigned to protect it. The entire operation would be overseen by a major general, and the loading and firing of the gun would be commanded by a colonel. Like most railway guns, Gustav could alter the range of its shot by adjusting the elevation of the barrel, but could not traverse laterally in any way. In order to aim, the entire gun carriage would be moved along a dedicated curve in the specially laid tracks. The loading process was laborious and took several hundred men to prepare and fire the gargantuan projectile. The shells as well as the powder charges would be carried separately and lifted onto the firing platform by hoists. The shell would be shoved into place by a hydraulic ram, followed by the bags of powder propellant, and finally a gigantic brass obturation case which sealed off the breech. This was a slow process and could take upwards of 45 minutes to complete. At its best, the Schwerer Gustav could fire up to 14 rounds per day. Because of its immense size as well as difficulty aiming, the Gustav was not a particularly accurate weapon, which meant that the only viable targets were bunkers, buildings, and other stationary installations. At a test firing, Hitler reportedly brought up the possibility of firing the gun at tanks. No doubt the impact of the high explosive shells would vaporize even the toughest armored vehicle. In response, Tank Commander Heinz Guderian stated it could be fired at them, I dare say, but it could certainly never hit one. There is some degree of mystery about the active service of the Schwerer Gustav, which has been exacerbated by confusion over the number of pieces actually built. It is known that the first gun was test-fired in early 1941 under Hitler's personal supervision. Tests would continue while the carriage and other components were being completed. The Schwerer Gustav was sent into action at the siege of Sevastopol, part of Operation Barbarossa, in 1942. After weeks of preparation and assembly, it was ready to fire some shots in anger, becoming the largest artillery piece ever used in combat. During the siege, it fired about 40 rounds at the Soviet defenses of the city. It is reported that in one instance, a direct hit with a concrete piercing shell obliterated a Soviet ammunition storage depot, located 100 feet underground. After Sevastopol, there is some controversy over the history of the weapon. There are some indications that it was then sent north to the siege of Leningrad, though there are no reports of it firing during the engagement. There are also reports that it, or possibly the Dora gun, was sent to quell the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, though in all likelihood, the uprising was put down before it went into action. The fate of the guns is also unknown. There are reports by the U.S. Army which state that one of the guns was captured, which is corroborated by photographic evidence. This is probably a misunderstanding, as the Germans did make use of several other railway guns, and it is likely that this was one of the smaller cousins of the Schwerer Gustav, such as Thor, a 60-centimeter tracked gun. In any event, the gun or guns were supposed to have been destroyed to prevent their capture by the Allies, and nothing remains of this giant artillery piece, though some of the shells still exist as museum exhibits. Overall, whether there was one gun or two, the Schwerer Gustav was a failure, For the amount of resources expanded, the German military gained very little return on the investment. The amount of manpower dedicated to manufacturing and employing the weapon, as well as defending it, far outweighed the benefits. It was inaccurate, capable of only hitting stationary targets, and then only some of the time, with only 10 of the rounds fired in combat, hitting within 200 feet of their target, with some shots missing by as much as half a mile. Because of its massive size, it was a perfect target for enemy aircraft, which is why it was forced to travel with dedicated flak battalions. In addition, the weeks of setup time meant that it could only be deployed in static positions, and the ever-fluctuating front lines of the Second World War made such a stationary weapon system unfeasible. Any value it created for psychological or propaganda purposes were far outweighed by the cost. Like the battleship Bismarck and other grandiose projects of the Third Reich, Schwerer Gustav is the epitome of Hitler's flair for the dramatic rather than the practical. It is best summed up by the General Chief of Staff, Franz Halder, who stated that it was, quote, an extraordinary piece of engineering, but useless.